진행하면 되는가요? 예, 잠시 후 2020
Shortly, we are going to start Global Korea Convention 2020. To stop the spread of COVID-19, we are observing all the government guidelines for the convention. I'd like to ask you to keep your mask on throughout the convention. And also, today's convention, all the presentations are being live streamed on YouTube and on the convention website as well. So please observe the time schedule. Welcome to our session, Energy Sector and Climate Change. I am the moderator for the session, Dong-jin Choi from Climate Institute for Climate Change Action. So we are now organized by the Ministry of Environment and Korea Environmental Policy Institute and also KEEI as well. We'd like to start the opening ceremony. We will listen to first opening remarks by Director Yong Sung-jo from KEEI via video. So let's listen to Director Cho's message. Good morning. I am Yong Sung-jo from KEEI. We are co-hosting this conference with the Korea Environmental Policy Institute. Thank you all very much for attending this convention either on-site or online via YouTube. We are now coming towards the end of year 2020. The world was deeply challenged by COVID-19. COVID-19 really turned upside down our life and also impacted the global economy significantly. And also, many countries are now trying to reduce our reliance on carbon energy and to move towards carbon neutrality. This year, we see the start of new regulations and also we want to reduce emissions, and by year 2015 we need to submit our roadmap to cut back our emission to the international community. We also announced to be a carbon neutral country. So along with other 120 countries, Korea promised to become carbon neutral. And this is quite a challenge. We are heavily dependent on emitting industries such as petrochemical, cement, and other industries as well. So we emit a lot of carbon. So in the future, we might be challenged in terms of environmental friendly standards. So we need to act now to deal with the climate change and to migrate to low carbon society. This is not an option. This is a must to ensure our future survival. Reducing carbon emission is a new paradigm for the global economy. For our own economy and for our future generation, we need to be more proactive in dealing with climate change and carbon emission. Particularly, it costs a lot of money to reduce carbon emission, and we need to view that cost as investment in our future. In today's session, we are going to put together everyone's wisdom to come up with ideas to solve these issues. And we have presentations for you to give you an overview of the current challenges and the potential way forward. I hope that today's session will be a forum for active idea sharing to resolve our current challenges. Carbon neutrality is now set as our national goal, but who is going to do what needs to be decided from now on. So to make decision, we hope to have a very active idea exchange. And once again, I want to thank you all for participating, and I hope today's session will be very informative for you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your opening remarks. And now I'd like to invite Vice President Young-soo Lee from Korea Environment Policy Institute for his welcoming remarks. Good morning. I am Young-soo Lee from KEI. Director Yong Sung-jo from KEEI and Ambassador Jae-chul Choi and also Director Dong-jin Choi from Institute for Climate Change Action, and all the speakers, Director O, Dr. Lee Sang-yeop, Dr. Lee Sang-jun, Dr. Hwang Se-young, and Dr. Kim Sung-jin as well. Thank you all for your contribution for this session. And also thank you all for the audience for participating in this session, both on-site and online. As you are well aware, response to climate change, it is a must to ensure our survival and our future. The world is now accelerating its migration to carbon neutral society and economy. A new international order is emerging in the global economy. EU and America and other countries are adopting carbon border tax, and global companies and financial companies are moving towards limiting their transactions and investment to eco-friendly companies. So in the face of these tremendous changes, Korea needs to be proactive. Regarding carbon neutrality, there is an international coalition including 120 countries to deal with this issue. And last September at the Climate Summit meeting, 65 countries announced carbon neutrality, including China and Japan. And also, President Moon Jae-in, during his address to the National Congress in October 2018, President Moon mentioned that Korea is moving towards carbon neutrality by 2050 in attempt to deal with climate change. So this is very important. We have a lot of tasks to do in terms of energy conversion, industry innovation, and circular economy realization as well. And at my organization as well, we have a lot of research about low carbon society vision and vision implementation strategy, Korean Green New Deal strategy development, and others. Also, we have various forums that we run, for example, Green Conversion Policy Forum, Green New Deal, Environmentally Friendly Energy Conversion Forum, and Regional Green New Deal Symposium as well. These forums are our efforts to ensure enough communication among stakeholders. We want to expand people's awareness about this needed migration to carbon neutrality. And also, the Ministry of Environment worked together with my organization and KEEI to put together this session. Here we are going to talk about climate change response and what kind of policy direction is needed and what are sectoral tasks that we need to do. So I hope that this discussion we are going to have today will strengthen Korea's leadership in this area and upgrade our status in leading issues in this area. Once again, thank you very much for participating in this session. Thank you.
이영수 부원장님.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your kind remarks. Now we're going to hear the keynote speech delivered by Mr. Choi Jae-chul, who was formerly the climate change ambassador, and Mr. Choi is very active in the climate change response activities here in Korea. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Choi Jae-chul, as was introduced. I would like to congratulate the organizers of this very important session despite the very challenging circumstances under the COVID-19, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this forum. So can I have the next slide, please? In 1981, I became a diplomat and I entered the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I'm a career diplomat. And I have worked as a diplomat for 38 years, and more than 20 years of that was dedicated to energy, development cooperation, and climate change-related diplomatic efforts. And Convention on Biodiversity, and also pre-on gas restrictions, and so various environmental-related issues and international conventions were part of my mandate. Japan and China and Russia were some of the partners with whom we had bilateral discussions in order to promote environment and also to represent our own interests. So in my role as a former climate change, I try to represent our national interest, at the same time strike a right balance with the climate change efforts. 5 years ago, in 2015, the global community has set the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals. People, prosperity, partnership, the earth. These 5 Ps have been determined as key aspects and values which we would seek to protect. And there are different levels of development and different levels of readiness. And we are nevertheless trying to achieve the UN SDGs. And secondly, there's the Paris Agreement, which was reached in December 2015. And so we are supposed to control the rise in temperature to a certain target level so that we can reach a low-carbon society and protect our environment. Paris Agreement also includes climate finance and climate change response and capacity building, and it also seeks to define a transparency framework for all countries to ensure that they live up to their commitments. And also implementation performance assessment is also part of the Paris Agreement. Of course, there needs to be a respect for the differences of the individual circumstances of the countries, but at the same time, there is a need to really live up to the commitments. So every 5 years, the NDCs need to be reported to the Secretariat, and there needs to be progress made on achieving the NDCs. And Korean government has promoted itself as the middle bridge that connects the developing countries and also the developed countries. And so we have also made financial contributions, and we've been able to deliver ODA projects to partner countries. And we also worked very hard to promote the Paris Agreement amongst the developing countries as well. This year, we have a very unique situation where we are reminded of the importance of environmental protection. And a lot of the progress made in achieving UN SDGs have been, set back by COVID-19. And we see an exacerbation of the gap between the haves and the have-nots due to the pandemic. And according to the World Bank report, about 100 million people in the world will drop to absolute poverty levels, and this really sets back the progress made on UN SDGs. And climate change and the unfettered development by human activities have been cited as key causes of this situation. We really need to recover our economy, and we really need to respond to climate change. And in this regard, many countries see the best practice model in the European New Deal. And Joe Biden, during the campaign, also announced the low carbon 2050 goal. And under the Obama administration, John Kerry was at the forefront of climate change negotiations. And we believe that he's probably going to lead the global initiatives or the U.S. initiatives with regards to climate change in the new administration. And the NDC-related work will be strengthened under the new U.S. administration. So the low-carbon policies have made some progress. If you look at Japan, it was able to increase the percentage of renewable energies by 20%, and already they've achieved significant progress. And by 2021, it will be able to reach 21% of renewable energy portion in the total energy mix. China accounts for 50% of the new renewable energy facilities being installed in the world. And China announced the 2050 carbon neutrality goal. And because China seeks to achieve a certain level of climate change response in keeping with its responsibility as a member of the international community. President Moon Jae-in also announced the 2050 carbon neutrality goal in October this year. And Korea needs to more proactively engage in achieving this carbon neutrality. So in 1990, Korea was amongst the developing countries in terms of the targets that were set. In 1990, with the exception of Turkey, most of the OECD countries was significantly higher than Korea in terms of the emissions. And most of the EU countries had already exceeded their peak emissions. And now, 25 years later, in 2018, if we look at the statistics, there has been significant change. Korea has significantly increased its income and also GHG emissions, and we do not know when we will actually hit the peak emission. So in terms of the emission levels, we have really evolved out of being a developing country into a developed nation. So we really have a larger responsibility as a developed economy to contribute to the climate change response. And so the carbon neutrality 2050 goal is very, very significant. So can we have the next slide, please? The 2050 carbon neutrality goal will drive a major transformation across the Korean society and economy. I think this is a significant goal that probably has larger significance than the denuclearization declaration on the Korean Peninsula. So this is an important commitment. And we have many domestic policies that need to be amended. And we also need to shift away from just being a follower of other countries' leading initiatives to become one of the leaders. And instead of just copying the policies of other developed nations, we really need to develop our own policies because our timeline is not very long. 2050 is not so far away. And we really have no time to lose. We have a very carbon-centric industry and economy, and so we really need to work hard on achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement because we did make a significant commitment. And despite our commitments, oftentimes we were faced with criticism from the international communities because there was a significant gap between what we committed to and what we were able to implement and achieve. And we really need to be able to coordinate our policies and bridge the differences between the various ministries that have hindered the implementation of our policies towards better climate response. And so we need to have a better alignment of our climate change policies and energy policies. This alignment will help us become a more responsible member of the international community. And we don't necessarily have to follow everything that the advanced countries had put forth. The UK raised its emissions targets, and UK announced that it will not be purchasing emissions credits in order to fulfill their goals. That doesn't mean that Korea needs to take the same approach. The Paris Agreement allows for each country to consider its own capabilities and set its own plans to achieve the NDCs. So we could maybe work towards having climate alliance, or we could participate in an East Asian carbon market. So we can use various ways to achieve our NDCs. I think there may be four things that we can four potential outcomes. We might actually fail. We might have a soft landing. We might have a hard landing, or we might have a very smart landing. And we don't want to actually land on the wrong foot when it comes to climate change response, because that would lead to a significant decline in our standing in the international community, and environment will be also detrimental to the environment. In Africa, there's a saying, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And I think we have to determine whether the 2050 carbon neutrality goal is something that needs to be worked on together so that we can reach far-reaching goals. Thank you very much, Mr. Che, for your very inspiring keynote speech. Since COVID-19, Korea's international standing has been raised significantly. So in keeping with that raised status, we also need to step up and really strengthen our efforts in terms of climate change response. Now we're going to begin our presentations.
세 분의
We are going to listen to 3 presentations followed by discussion. First speaker is going to be Dr. Il-young Oh from the Ministry of Government. He's going to talk about Korea's 2050 LEDS policy. Second speaker is Dr. Sang-yup Lee from KEI. He's going to talk about low carbon conversion. And then Dr. Sang-jun Lee from KEI is going to talk about energy sector tasks for carbon neutrality. Each presenter, please keep your please keep your presentation to 20 minutes. Excuse me. The first speaker is Mr. Park Sang-chul from Ministry of Environment.
안녕하십니까.
Hello, as introduced, I am Sang-chul Park from the Ministry of Environment. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me as a speaker to this convention. So I want to thank my fellow speakers and discussants as well. Now let me begin my presentation. So key policy direction to realize 2050 carbon neutrality. That is my title. So this is the content of my presentation. First topic is our current policy status in response to climate change. So we are now living in the era of climate crisis. We had the hottest summer in 2018. The average temperature was 25.4 Celsius degree. And the next year, we had the warmest winter in 2019. And this year, we had a record long rainy season. And around the world, these kinds of unusual climate situation is a commonplace. In France and Spain, they posted a record high temperature of 45.9 Celsius degree, and there was a massive flooding in China. In Australia, massive wildfire consumed about 80% of the size of 80% of the Korean peninsula. And given this situation, when we look at the greenhouse gas emission by Korea, we are emitting a lot. So in 2018, we reached a record high. But last year, we emitted slightly less. So we were able to reduce the growth rate of greenhouse gas emission. But still, we are far behind in terms of meeting our reduction target. So actually, 87% of greenhouse gas emission in Korea is from the energy sector. So government is not allowing any new power plant based on coal. And we are now reviewing phasing out old coal-based power plants. We are also going to increase the renewable energy portion to 20% by 2030 and to 30 to 35% by 2014. And the capacity also is going to be increased to 42.7 gigawatts by 2020. We also want to use a market mechanism to achieve cost-efficient reduction. So emission trading system is now in place, and this led to actual reduction as well. And during the first phase of this project of emission trading system, the system was established, and then we are now currently in the second phase, and we are providing a lot of reduction incentives. The Paris Climate was adopted in 2015, and under the Paris Agreement, we set the target of the global temperature increase at below 2 Celsius degree, and ideally 1.5 Celsius degree. And now we have a nationally determined contribution as well, and also LEDS as well, long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies. So each country is going to submit their NDC and LEDC. And also, we want to limit the global temperature increase at 1.5%. To achieve that, we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. So because of that, carbon neutrality by 2050 became a truly global agenda. Now I want to talk about the international trend. The international community is moving fast. Last year, in December, EU announced its carbon neutrality goal by 2015. In the US, President-elect Biden also announced carbon neutrality by 2015 as his campaign pledge. China as well announced to achieve carbon neutrality before 2016 during the UN General Assembly. Japan is also on board. So various countries and the heads of countries announced the carbon neutrality around the world. Korea as well is making a lot of effort. Local governments in Korea built a voluntary coalition to move towards carbon neutrality. And the National Congress in Korea as well passed a resolution to pursue 2050 carbon neutrality as a way to deal with the climate change. So on October 28th, in his address to the National Congress, President Moon Jae-in announced that Korea is moving forward carbon neutrality by 2050 in response to the climate change in conjunction with the international community. Now I want to talk about the progress in terms of the LEDs. March last year, we had a meeting with about 100 experts from the academia, the industry, the NGO. This is an expert forum where the low carbon society vision was proclaimed, and also a lot of ideas were put forward, which led to 5 scenarios to reduce carbon emission and to achieve ultimately carbon neutrality. Now, this year, we also have a pan-government consulting body or consultative body, including 15 ministries. And also, we are promoting discussion with the public as well. So as a result, we had a meeting with civil society, and also we are calling for massive investment to achieve the goal and to make a progress in LEDs as well. And we have a lot of agreement, not just from the public, but also from various stakeholders as well. And also now stakeholders even agree on the necessary cost. Now I want to talk about the main substance of the LEDs. So net zero or carbon neutrality means to minimize carbon emission and to offset greenhouse gas emission or carbon emission by other measures. So ultimately, you achieve net zero. So if you look at the left hand of this chart, this was actually put forward in last year's conference of low carbon society. So it talks about various methods or tools to reduce carbon emission. And on the right-hand side, it talks about some specific technology elements to achieve this target. We can see 2 major directions of carbon neutral scenarios. One is to adopt carbon reduction technology and innovative technology. And the other scenario direction is to achieve a circular economy where the entire process of material flow has a minimum level of input energy. Given the current circumstances of Korea, the 2050 carbon neutrality is definitely a significant challenge because our carbon emission peaked in 2018 and it's going down a little bit, but still we don't have much time to achieve carbon neutrality. And compared to EU and other advanced countries, we emit a lot of carbon. And also, we are highly reliant on coal-based power plant compared to other advanced countries. But we also have our strength. For example, in 2020, we are the #1 market player in EV battery, and we also posted #1 sales globally for hydrogen cars in 2019, and also according to the Bloomberg Innovation Index, we are one of the top 3 innovative countries in the world. We've been keeping this position for 9 consecutive years. So definitely, although the situation is challenging, we have the capacity to meet our goal. So these are some key policy areas for 2050 carbon neutrality. First, power generation. Fossil fuel is now going to be phased out and more renewable energy sources are going to be phased in. Second, coal, LNG, uranium, and we are going to move away from these energy sources and move towards hydrogen. And third, we are going to take advantage of Northeast Asia super grid. And also fourth, we are going to build an ecosystem where anybody can be both a producer and consumer of electricity. Now I want to talk about key policies in the industry area. First, we need to actively develop and utilize decarbonizing technology. We also need to refresh our old factories and industrial complex so that they can be more eco-friendly green facilities. And also, we need to use less plastic or steel and use more innovative materials. And we need to build a circular economy. Now, in the architecture or construction sector, we need to have a more eco-friendly architecture, even to the level of zero energy buildings. And also, we need to have a more smart, eco-friendly living environment. And energy consumption data of a building needs to be more transparent. And now, in the area of transportation, we need to move away from internal combustion engine to more eco-friendly vehicles. We also need to more actively manage transportation need, and we can utilize autonomous driving vehicle and car sharing services as well. And also we need to have a more eco-friendly, low-carbon logistical services as well. Now we need to act urgently to respond to the climate change, and everyone needs to participate. This way, we can change our economy and our mindset. And in this process of conversion, we need to support the vulnerable groups. And we need to minimize conflicts. We need to pursue this via democratic decision-making process. This way, we can achieve carbon neutrality driven by local community and ultimately green financing as well. So going forward, we are going to submit LEDS and NDC by the end of this year. Again, our vision is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And also, in terms of the Paris Convention implementation and 2050 carbon neutrality implementation, we need to revise our basic legal framework as well. So as you can see here, we have a basic act called the Green New Deal Basic Act. And under that, there are various laws as well. So starting next year, we are going to have phased scenarios to achieve 2050 carbon neutrality. So we are going to come up with multiple scenarios tailored to Korea-specific situations. We are also going to establish key policy strategies as well, and it's also going to be incorporated into the national development plan as well. Carbon neutrality by 2050 is definitely a big challenge for us, but it is a definite way forward for Korea. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I believe that you spoke not just for the Ministry of Environment, but also for the entire Korean government. You talked about Korean government's vision.
Next, we have with us Dr. Sang-Yup Lee, Senior Research Fellow from Korea Environment Institute. He's going to talk about the Korea's issues and policy tasks for achieving a transition to low-carbon society. Good morning. I am Sang-Yup Lee, as was introduced. In order for our country to develop in a sustainable manner, there are many things that need to be taken into consideration. One of those issues is carbon neutrality, and this is very critical for the future of Korea. It's an important policy agenda as well. Environment, energy, greenhouse gases have become an important aspect of our policy agenda because we need to achieve what we call green growth. And right now, we're also talking about the Korean New Deal and the Green New Deal. And so we have to look into our past efforts to achieve green growth and how we can build on those efforts going forward for greater outcomes. Now, I would like to touch upon how the 2050 carbon neutrality, how carbon neutrality is different from green growth. One key difference is that this is a major transformation and change of perspective. Carbon neutrality is a completely new approach. So this is a major transition from old ways of thinking climate change. There are many plans and policies that have been presented by the previous speaker. And in order for us to pursue carbon neutrality, we have to fully implement and take advantage of all of the plans and means that we have in place right now. And we need to have the necessary resources. We need to put in place the right incentives and the right set of legislations. Of course, this is just things that we need to do, and this goes without saying. And the government needs to coordinate so that all of these plans and measures produce a synergistic effect. And I think that is the key aspect that we need to focus on when we strive towards carbon neutrality. Now, with that, I would like to go into the main part of my presentation. With regards to carbon neutrality, there are many discussions taking place at different sectors and levels in Korean society. Of course, one of the key things is the advanced technologies that may be helpful in this regard, and also the government needs to create policy measures that will make carbon neutrality possible. But is carbon neutrality achievable just with technology measures or just with policy measures? Because it probably isn't. And we need to have an overhauling of the overall government system and also the industrial structure where there is a lot of fossil fuels dependent industries in place. And also we need to establish a better central and local governance structure where responsibilities are adequately shared. And if we think about how to go forward towards carbon neutrality, I think we need to have a very constructive roadmap going from the roadmap towards 2030, 2040, and ultimately 2050. And also we have to answer many questions about the costs involved in achieving this, because this is something that many are interested in. And also there are initiatives like East Asian Supergrid, which was mentioned by the previous presenter. And also there is CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So we need to look into whether the technological limitations or uncertainties with regards to CCUS have been solved or can be solved in the near future. Right now, the Korean government is grappling with the challenges posed by COVID-19. And if we look at the Q3 and Q4 economic situation, we see that the export-oriented industries have really driven a recovery. But these are the industries which are very large emitters of carbon. So on the one hand, we need to have a very resilient export sector in order to achieve economic recovery. But at the same time, these industries are part of the problem that we have with carbon emissions. And so, people are talking about decoupling, and all of these aspects are very important topics for the government to consider. And these issues should be viewed and considered from a comprehensive perspective, and these should not be treated as isolated issues, because that approach will make solution very difficult to achieve. So let me talk about the key challenges that we have in Korea. First is the challenges we face in the energy market and system. How can we reorganize our energy system and energy market towards carbon neutrality? That's a big challenge for us. And secondly, we are looking to expand the use and production of renewable energies, and there are also volatilities and uncertainties involved in this, so we need to minimize those as we move ahead. And of course, we're going to develop technologies, and how we're going to really spread the technology so that it will be widely adopted is another key challenge. And also we need to get acceptance and buy-in from the society at large. And we need to look both at economy and the environment, and also at society and technology and policies, and we need to really have a comprehensive view. So from a short-term, mid-term to longer-term perspective, what we're going to do at each step of the way towards carbon neutrality, that's something that the Korean government needs to plan. Now, with regards to the renewable energy space, we had these sets of plans even before this carbon neutrality goal was announced. So we had put forth Renewable Energy 3020 plan. So there were many parts to this plan. And building on this, there are many renewable energy policies that have been introduced, as you can see in this slide. And these, of course, it's important to follow through with these policies as planned. But at the same time, because we have set this new goal of carbon neutrality, we need to perhaps strengthen or reinforce some of these policies in order to make carbon neutrality achievable. Now, going to one level deeper, well, we are currently doing a research which hasn't been completed yet, so I would like to provide you some interim outcomes from this research. I think acceptance is very important. And when I talk about acceptance, I'm not talking about in a narrow sense. So it's not just acceptance from the local community, but I'm saying acceptance from the market, the industries, the society at large. So are these policies accepted and acceptable by the different sectors and markets and communities in Korea? And our research focuses on three aspects that are outlined as part of the broad sense of acceptance. We often talk about, power generation, and this power generation sector, of course, is an important piece in the overall energy market. So this is where we really need to achieve a great transformation. And we really need to develop and spread the renewable energies technology so that they're more widely adopted. And in order for that to happen, the energy market structure needs to drive that. And also social acceptance. When I'm talking about social acceptance, I'm talking about the local communities. And we often talk about the green-green conflict nowadays, and environmental impact assessment, and how renewable energy production is treated in the environmental impact assessment. So those are the key topics that we're covering in our research efforts. So if you look at these two slides, I have outlined the key issues that we have identified through our research. So let me just give you an example. So right now we're looking at district energy production and distribution in the Jeju Island. Of course, it's an island, so the conditions are slightly different from the mainland. But Jeju Island had instituted a renewable energy plan earlier than other local governments in Korea, and it really started out earlier than other regions in Korea. So Jeju can be a good testbed case when it comes to renewable energy use. Which is why we have focused on Jeju Island to do this research. And these were some of the issues. For example, there was the constraint on energy generation. That's an issue. So in Jeju Island, let's say there is wind power generation. And in introducing the wind power, there was the issue of designating the optimal locations to have wind farms, and this location planning had issues. And also, there is some issues with the way profit sharing is done, and also how license or concessions to do business in this area is given. This is another area where there are challenges. So within 20 to 30 years from now, we will see similar problems in other parts of Korea where renewable energy production and use will be promoted. So I was not able to go into details, but on the whole, in order to achieve carbon neutrality, we need to have each locality, each local government and region play the dominant role in providing energy within its own region. So there needs to be a rational energy market established in the individual regions. And also, when these regional level renewable energy projects are instituted, that should be given very good consideration in environmental impact assessment. And if we look at this, at the top of all of this, there should be a very good energy market governance. So if we have a sound energy market governance, then we can have very good transition, and we could have very vibrant regional energy production, and then also very productive environmental impact assessment. So this cannot be achieved by a short-term effort, but the government ministries need to continue their coordination and discussion so that they develop an energy market governance that is trusted by the Korean people. And I think this is a key state agenda that will enable the achievement of a carbon neutral society. Again, this has to be a major transformation, and therefore this is not something that can be achieved overnight. It's a mid to long-term endeavor. And of course, there are different parties who will have different interests and different approaches. But if you think about carbon neutrality, this is about sustainable development. And a part of this sustainable development is inclusiveness. And so the Korean government should try to include and try to narrow differences between the individual ministries to make this grand transformation possible. And when plans are announced by the government, there are criticisms about, why the Korean government is publishing a plan that lacks substance or the specifics. But if you look at it from a different perspective, it's actually very difficult to set up a plan that is very concrete and very specific in a short period of time for a problem that requires a grand transformation. So I think the key thing is that the government is very committed and that the government is on top of this and that the government will continue to make growing efforts to develop and evolve its plan along the way. And I think we need to really have the Korean government show little by little the success stories from different projects that will ultimately help build trust in the government. And the ministry, the gentleman from the ministry made a very good presentation, and the Korean government, he said, will be setting the NDCs for 2030 and announcing this by the end of the year. Well, I think the resetting of the NDC is very important, and we need to have a very good emissions response roadmap. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Sang-Yup Lee, for your insightful presentation. You gave a very good outline of the policy challenges that the Korean government is facing.
이상
And now I'd like to invite team leader Sang-jun Lee from KEAI. He's going to talk about the energy sector tasks to achieve carbon neutrality. Hello, I'm Sang-jun Lee from KEAI. Today, nowadays, Korea announced the vision for carbon neutrality. And where is Korea now? Well, Korea now has an idea for a house to build. So Korea has now a picture for what kind of house it wants to build for the future. And now we need to think about how to build it and more specifics of the house. So once we decided on, so if we just go ahead and laying bricks, then we might have to later on break down those bricks if the blueprint is changed. So this process is very important. The process of how to build a new house is very important, and I want to talk about that process today. So this is the contents of my presentation. 1, climate change, COVID-19, Green New Deal, followed by energy conversion, carbon neutrality, Green New Deal, and lastly, Korean Green New Deal's direction. So first, climate change and COVID-19. So around the world, this is a global issue, not just a Korean issue. There are 3D that stands for major direction for energy around the world. So we need to now move towards a more energy efficient system. We need to produce and consume energy more efficiently. And also, the production system needs to move away from centralized system to distributed, decentralized system. And also, we need to conserve our energy. We need to consume energy much less. So the 3D stands for decentralization, decarbonization, and digitalization. This is the overall new energy paradigm for the world, and Korea is no exception. So Korea, for example, the high consumption area such as the Seoul metropolitan area and industrial park, for these areas, we had a large-scale power plants. But now we feel the need for more locally distributed system for production and consumption as well. And the COVID-19 was really an unexpected kind of obstacle. So the whole world is now kind of depressed because of COVID-19. But as I just mentioned, the energy system and new changes coming to the current energy system it's relatively less impacted by COVID-19. Because if you look at the overall global supply chain, while fossil fuel elements were impacted directly, a huge cutback in investment. And renewable energy is still receiving an increasing amount of investment. So this is a notable trend. And also, given these circumstances and with the added challenge from COVID-19, how can we proceed? So this is why we come down to Green New Deal. Green New Deal is just not limited to Korea. And when COVID-19 is behind us and when our economy recovers from COVID-19, what will be our recovery path? Specifically, this is about where do we invest how much money. So in that sense, Green New Deal is a great starting point. Green New Deal is nothing new. It didn't just emerge overnight. It was actually proposed in 2009 by UNEP when the global financial crisis was taking place. So in UNEP, they mentioned that this is now a good time to pursue Green New Deal. So against the backdrop of the global financial crisis, let's steer the global economy towards a more green economy. But that proposal failed to gain global momentum or global consensus back then. And also, but in the latter part of the first decade of 21st century, some European countries made efforts in this direction. But then again, European countries had to deal with the financial crisis. So because of that, Green New Deal didn't show great progress. Then what kind of conclusion can we draw from this? So the climate change and response to climate change, it is not a country-specific issue. It's a global issue where countries participate in. Nowadays, Green New Deal is emerging again. For example, in the U.S. House of Representatives, Green New Deal emerged as an important issue. The situation is the same in Europe as well, and COVID-19 really amplified the need for Green New Deal as well. And also, many people are now saying that our recovery from COVID-19 needs to be green and sustainable. So this is how we can summarize Green New Deal. Overcoming the negative impact of COVID-19 in a sustainable manner. So, in order for us to overcome from the negative impact of COVID-19, we need to make investments. And where do we want to put that investment? We prefer to put it in sustainable areas, sustainable initiatives. So that is kind of a quick summary of Green New Deal. So in Korea, the key element of Green New Deal is energy, I believe. Well, I work in the energy sector, but energy sector takes up about 80% of carbon emission in Korea. So given that, energy conversion takes up a key element position in Korea's Green New Deal. In October, when President Moon addressed the National Congress, President Moon announced the 2050 carbon neutrality. Then what is its relationship with Green New Deal? For us to achieve carbon neutrality, we need to do certain things, and now is the time to undertake those things to make us carbon neutral. So, the carbon neutrality is an ongoing policy package. And for these programs or projects to proceed smoothly, then we need support, of course. And also, we need some other new elements to make the existing projects more effective. So I want to here point out some obstacles to Korean Green New Deal. So first of all, we need to have a major shift in the current energy system. Now we are using a lot of fossil fuel, but we now need to assume that going forward in 2015, we are not going to use fossil fuel basically. That should be our basic assumption for the future. So for example, we have a heating system in our house. So we need to think that going forward, our heating system is not going to use fossil fuel. That should be the starting point. Then this kind of major shift can cause instability in the energy system in Korea. So we need to find a way to address the instability issue. For example, we need to have much more flexible, much more stable power system. That is a must-have. And second, for Korea to achieve carbon neutrality, so now the key players are economic players, for example, businesses and people, households. These are the key players in building homes. So these key players in home building, they need to participate in Green New Deal initiative. For that to happen, business goals and the government division and the public's needs, they all need to be aligned. To simply put, an architect does not always build a home for their own home. So we need to have an alignment of interest. And also, in many sectors in the Korean economy, it's quite challenging to reduce carbon emission. Because right now, because of the current industrial structure, for example, cement, petrochemical, steel, here they use a lot of fossil fuel, for example, coal, and they use it as their power source. They use it as basic ingredient, not just power source. So the more these industries produce their products for the economy, then they end up producing more carbon emission. So this is something we need to address as well. So this is the direction that I want to emphasize. Here, we need two more elements. So one, we need to have a deregulation of power system. Power system is highly regulated industry. Now we need to relax regulations here to invite more private sector participation. And also, we need to have a more democracy in the energy system, meaning more participation from the general public. So general public needs to be invited into the system as a producer and consumer and a trader of energy. And now I want to talk about the Green New Deal direction for Korea. So this is a kind of some ideas from my organization. So we want to put forward 6 policy proposals as written on this slide. These could be some alternative ideas for Korea to achieve carbon neutrality. Number 1, we need to have a vision for long-term energy system conversion. I believe everyone will agree on it. So energy system itself needs to be carbon neutral, and how can we achieve that in the longer term? And what is going to be this vision's relationship with the current government efforts to achieve carbon neutrality? So this is about energy conversion. Government mentioned that it will announce a new plan for energy conversion next year. So we will have to see. And so far, the energy system, whether it's based on gas or oil or electricity, each energy system or energy market are separate. But going forward, these energy systems and energy markets needs to be integrated into a single market. And in this single market, green energy needs to take a core position. This integrated single market will have a flexibility that is not allowed in the current disparate, fragmented market system. So, this integrated green energy system needs to take place. Here, I call it sector coupling. And second, a policy proposal. This is for a more near term. So as more renewable energy is produced and used, relevant power grid needs to be improved. So for example, the power grid is weak at certain point, so the power grid needs to be improved and strengthened for the near term. And also we need to have some spare capacity as well. So here I'm talking about more flexibility as well. And also to expand renewable energy. The more renewable energy we use, the more complicated, the more difficult it is going to be to manage the power grid. Luckily, Korea is very strong in ICT. So, utilizing our ICT, we need to have a more highly advanced management system or technology to manage the power grid, incorporating renewable energy. Policy proposal number 3, we need to improve regulations, meaning we need to have reasonable and gradual regulation improvement. Certain areas are ambiguous, so licensing process can be very arduous. People are saying that renewable energy is expensive. It's because the business cost, the licensing cost is high for renewable energy. So when the input cost is high, then of course the price is high. So we need to revise, relax regulations for that. And also, we need to have a more private sector players in the renewable energy. For that, maybe we need a new platform. And policy proposal number 4. We need to have a more distributed energy system close to local government and local communities. Until now, local government, local communities have been passive in the power system. Now they're getting more proactive, but still most local government, most local communities are not as active. And do they have enough capacity and ability to be more proactive? That's quite doubtful. So the government needs to support the local government to have better capacity to play a more proactive role in the locally distributed energy system. And for that, the government needs to provide a certain support and reallocate resources maybe. So maybe we can also have some localized, eco-friendly community project model. And now policy proposal number 5, we need to support those high emitting sectors to have a better capacity, the better ability to reduce their emission. So for these sectors, for them to go completely coal-free, it's very difficult. To do that, they need a lot of R&D because they need to develop new process, new manufacturing process, new production process. And that will inevitably entail higher product prices. In that, to help them out, maybe the government needs to implement some green procurement program. Here, preferably a comprehensive support, a policy package might be a better way So this is something the government needs to do to help these high emission sectors. And particularly for high cost, high risk R&D activities, I think the government can take up that kind of burden for these sectors. And next policy proposal, this is more about technology area. When you look at the green energy policy or plan coming from the government, you see there are a lot of business ideas, and I believe that more packaged project idea, meaning a convergence of different industries and businesses, need to be part of that green energy plan, the government. So for example, even if a certain technology is available, if there's a no commercial market for that, if there's a no use for that, that technology is going to fade away. So for example, we need to have a convergence project where the technology player and the business players can come together. For example, EV, electric vehicles. For example, EV can be used not just as a vehicle, but as a platform to trade power. So that's the kind of convergence project that I'm talking about. And this is my last slide. So from the perspective of energy conversion, climate change and energy conversion, these are all intertwined. In Korea, we even have the issue of air pollution, the fine dust in the air. That is a big issue in Korea. So as you can see here, for the sustainable development, all these elements, energy conversion, Green New Deal, and response to climate change, they are all intertwined. And within this framework, we can achieve carbon neutrality. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Lee, for your presentation. So you talked about a Green New Deal as a core task to achieve carbon neutrality. Thank you very much for your presentation. And also regarding Green New Deal, we have a separate session in this room starting 1:50. So if you're interested in that session, you can please come back. So they are going to talk about Green New Deal and international cooperation in the post-COVID-19 world. It's going to start at 1:50.
잘 들었습니다. 이제
So we have heard the three presentations. Now I would like to invite the three presenters and the two panelists to come up to the stage for us to conduct the discussion session.
예, 들리신가요?
Can you hear me well? Okay, so I enjoyed the three presentations very much. We're going to have our panel discussion now. We have two panelists. We have Dr. Sungjin Kim from KEI and also Dr. Seyoung Hwang from National Youth Policy Institute. We actually have one panelist connected remotely, and we have another panelist who is here on site. So let's first view the video connection.
네, 안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear you well.
예, 그러면 진행하도록 하겠습니다.
So now I would like to proceed. Good afternoon. I am Seongjin Kim from KEI. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important session. I learned a lot from the three presentations. Green New Deal and 2050 carbon neutrality are two important initiatives. And I have been given about 7 minutes, so I would just like to limit my comment on just one thing that I'd like to mention in addition to the presentation. Transportation and mobility are an important area, and there's the smart grid, which is another important component of the Green New Deal. And in addition to manufacturing, I think it is very important to make significant investment in the services sector. I am recently doing research with regards to this. First, there is the EU initiatives, and also there is the photovoltaic energy generation initiatives.
자기 나라에서 탄소 비용을 많이
The carbon border adjustment is when a company does not emit significantly, then they can also impose carbon border tax on companies or businesses that emit a lot of carbon. So oftentimes, the companies are trying to move away from taking responsibilities with regards to carbon emissions reduction. So they want to introduce carbon border tax in order to bring greater fairness. So I think this can have an impact on the Korean businesses as well. So we need to look into this. Right now, Korea is largely reliant on imported energy, and a lot of the industries are energy intensive and are great emitters. So we really need to take into consideration these different initiatives taken by other countries. As I was looking at these topics, I think Korean industry is significantly disadvantaged in terms of services, whether it's digital services, financial services, insurance services. These are very important services industry that can have an impact on climate change, but Korean government is concentrated too much on manufacturing, which is why the services sector is not nurtured as much as it should be. So you need to have very detailed information about products and business models in order to establish very good carbon emission reduction strategies. And I think we can have better services companies that can deal with these data collection and analysis. So this could be just one example. In order to reduce carbon emission, we need to understand where emissions taking place and how much. And the collection of information data and the analysis of such data is very advanced in other countries, but in Korea, we are not as developed. And also, in lieu of this, there are insurance opportunities and financial services that can be linked to such data. But we are not really focusing our efforts to promote such services industries. And these industries are oftentimes left out of the various plans and strategies with regards to climate change response and carbon neutrality initiatives. So I think we really need to fill this gap. And with regards to renewable energy sector, I think we should look at the industry aspect of this. The solar energy production is often looked at with a great focus on manufacturing of the hardware, such as the solar panels and whatnot. And I know that's very important, but we should also consider the services that can go with this. So I would like to emphasize this very much. So when it comes to photovoltaic power generation, there are various technologies and processes involved. And of course, with regard to the manufacturing of these equipment, China is at the forefront, and we have some Korean companies who are doing quite well as well. But if you look at the on the West, I think the approach from the West is that they would purchase the low cost and value for money equipment, but what they would focus more on would be to build the services around it and the trading opportunities around it. So, they're not really focusing the solar energy generation from a manufacturing focused perspective, but they're looking at the additional services that can go with it. And I think that's very prominent in Europe and US, which we need to learn from. In conclusion, Green New Deal and carbon neutrality needs to be looked at by focusing on different industries that will make it possible. And we should look at this from an industry ecosystem perspective. And in that regards, I made my comments. Thank you very much. I think that was a very good point that you made. We often just concentrate on manufacturing sector when it comes to carbon neutrality initiatives. But in order for us to create a great ecosystem, we also need to have the effective services industries to go with this. So I think that was a very good point indeed.
And now we are going to invite researcher Se-young Hwang from Korea Adolescent Policy Research Institute. Hello, I am Se-young Hwang, as introduced. First of all, it is a great honor for me to participate in this session as a panelist. You might be wondering why I am here, given that I work at a Adolescent Policy Research Institute. We now set a national goal and vision of achieving 2050 carbon neutrality. And for me, this session has been a great learning experience. And as an educator, I want to approach this vision from the perspective of adolescents. In terms of implementing this policy, systematic and expertise approach will be important, but also we cannot disregard the people, particularly adolescents, who are going to be the key players in our future. In Liu, this conference in 1992, sustainability emerged as an important issue, and climate change as well. But still, climate change seemed like such a distant problem. But over time, people now understand that climate change is an imminent issue, and we need to act now globally. And also, Paris Convention was recently adopted by many countries as well. Now we think about not just climate change, but climate crisis really. So we have this level of awareness among people around the world. Given that, we also need to listen to the voices from adolescents. We know the famous environment activist from Sweden, and she really alerted a lot of adolescents to this global issue. And also, simultaneously, many people are now looking at this issue as a generational issue. For example, in Korea, there was a lawsuit in the Supreme Court saying that severe climate change response measures are really putting future generation at disadvantage. So this is really an issue that impacts future generation. So what we need to think is that we cannot disregard adolescents as just teenagers. We need to view them as stakeholders of this issue. Adolescents themselves, they see themselves as a party to this issue. We are now talking about carbon neutrality by 2050. And by 2050, the current teenagers are going to be the pillars of the Korean society. And they are going to be the decision makers, and they are going to be the main players in their fields. So it is only natural for them to take interest in this issue. So given that, I have a few suggestions to make about carbon neutrality. First, as Director O from the Environment Ministry mentioned, the Korean government is emphasizing a bold and immediate action in response to the climate change. And here, democratic decision-making governance establishment is really important. I think it assumes the importance of the public participation in democratic manner. And the government is also made a pledge to move towards carbon neutrality. So given that, policy proposals and policy monitoring should be open to public participation. So that is my first proposal. Particularly citizens' participation. Here, adolescents and youth should not be excluded. They should be invited to participate. And also in terms of setting national plans, and also already the government has a various forum to listen to the citizens' voice. So government already has an experience in working in a bottom-up approach. But even in this bottom-up approach, adolescents were not heard much in the past. So I hope that going forward, that can be changed and adolescents will be encouraged to participate and speak up. And also, for example, adolescents can participate in monitoring at the national level or at the local government's level in terms of monitoring meeting the national goal. And also more adolescents and youth need to participate in climate change action. For that, government support is necessary because first we need to raise the public awareness. For that, we need to have perhaps more campaigns. And in terms of pursuing this, the public needs to be recognized not just as a passive recipient of the government message, rather as a proactive participant in realizing the nation's vision. This year also marks an anniversary of a Human Rights Declaration, and adolescents' rights are part of human rights. And adolescents have the right not to be impacted negatively by climate change, but they also have the right to participate in the way the global community responds to the climate change. In concluding, once again, I hope to see more participation by adolescents and youth in these efforts. Thank you very much.
예, 최근 기후 위기와 관련된 토론회에서
We are holding a session on climate change response, and Some people say that we should not do youth washing and trying to just add maybe one person there to represent the voice of the youth and think that's enough. Well, I think we need to continuously listen to the voices that represent the views of our youth stakeholders. Now, I would like to receive questions from the floor or comments from the floor. I believe there are many people watching from remote locations via YouTube. And in the interest of time, perhaps we would have to close our session shortly. And before that, I would just like to ask the presenters or the panelists to just make final comments. So perhaps Mr. Park, just 1 minute of final comment, please.
네. 정부는 올해
Yes, so for this year, the government is going to submit the LEDS. So again, the government, I think, is now it now has a vision and goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and I will bring back all the ideas I heard from today's presentations back to my office. Thank you.
Dr. Lee? Well, with regards to the two panelists' comments, thank you very much for that feedback. And I already mentioned the suggestions that I would like to make to the government. And I would like to add to that by saying there are many voices and demands and requests and views from various stakeholders with regards to this issue. And also, I like the comment about focusing on the service sector when we are developing climate change strategies. And there are varying views that are should be inputted into the process of setting policies. And service industry, I think, is very important. But at the end of the day, the technological advances, if the services industry feel that the technological advances in the climate change sector is very critical and have great potential, then they will move. They will voluntarily move without necessarily having the government supporting the industries. I think what service industry really needs is to see that the government is consistently pushing forth climate change response policies. Perhaps Mr. Che or Dr. Lee? Dr. Lee, please.
I heard great feedback from the two designated discussants. Thank you. And I agree with your points. I felt that when the Paris Agreement was agreed upon, I felt something was lacking, meaning countermeasure if the signing party does not follow. So because if that happens, how are we going to resolve that? So I believe that going forward, sustainability is going to be important competitive edge. So the Paris Agreement, for now, it's about climate change. But we need to view that as a potentially trade agreement as well in the future. Thank you very much.
이맘때쯤에
Recently, the Ministry of Environment organized a discussion session to develop sustainably. And at the time, there were a number of goals that were set, which can be achieved with the initiatives from the central government and the local government. And then on the other side, there were people who were criticizing that despite all those plans and goals, it's going to be very difficult to achieve carbon neutrality within the set time frame. But it's just been a year since then, last year we were talking about whether carbon neutrality is really possible by 2050. That was the key message. But a year later, today, we are talking about what ways we need to implement in order to achieve this, because this is something that is not optional. And so I think our focus is more on actual problem solving and what to do. And the crisis posed by COVID-19 is really changing our mindset and everything in the way everything around climate change response and also how we see this problem. So we should not really be complacent in being followers to others that set the way forward. We really need to think on our feet, and we really need to live up to our responsibilities as a significant member of the international community. We have a sense of great responsibility that we share today, and perhaps we may not have shared very specific or concrete solutions, but we are here to reaffirm our commitment to carbon neutrality and climate response. And thank you very much for your participation today. I know there are people who were not able to share their comments or questions today, but again, you can post your comments or questions as a thread in the YouTube channel. Thank you very much.